Jamie and Rick Matson thought they were simply adding a spark to their marriage. But when they met Ben and Laura Callahan, their private fantasy twisted into a deadly obsession that ended with 2 bodies, a blood-soaked kitchen floor, and a hinted truth far darker than anyone imagined. In 2022, in the sun-drenched town of Clearwater, Florida, Jamie and Rick Matson lived what most would call a picture-perfect life. Their home was pristine, tucked away in a quiet cul-de-sac lined with palm trees and freshly cut lawns. Jamie was a top-performing real estate agent, known for her charm and polished appearance. Rick, a personal fitness trainer, ran a successful local gym and had a loyal client base. They had been married for nearly a decade, the kind of couple who looked good in Christmas cards and knew how to host a flawless backyard barbecue. But beneath their smooth exterior was a marriage that had grown predictable and emotionally distant. Rick, always more adventurous and impulsive than Jamie, had started exploring alternative lifestyles online. He read forums, joined private groups, and eventually found his way into the world of consensual partner swapping. It intrigued him, the idea of adding excitement without abandoning the commitment of marriage. Jamie, cautious by nature, was reluctant. She was loyal and grounded, not one to chase adrenaline at the cost of emotional safety. But Rick was persuasive. He framed the idea not as infidelity, but as exploration, something controlled, mutual, and respectful. Eventually, Jamie agreed to at least meet a couple he had been chatting with online. That couple was Ben and Laura Callahan, who lived in a nearby neighborhood just 15 minutes away. They were in their late 30s, slightly older than the Matsons, but just as polished. Ben worked in tech sales, smart and smooth-talking, while Laura owned a trendy home decor boutique. They had been in the lifestyle for years and knew exactly how to present it in the most flattering light. They met at a restaurant for drinks, just casual conversation, no pressure. The chemistry was subtle, not overwhelming, but enough to keep everyone curious. The following weekend, they met again, this time at the Callahans' home. What started as a few glasses of wine on the patio led to more intimate conversations, indoors. Jamie was nervous, but she noticed how relaxed Laura seemed. There were boundaries, clear communication, and constant check-ins. The experience was more respectful than she had imagined. Over time, they continued seeing each other. Sometimes just for dinner, other times for weekends away. The arrangement developed rules. Only together, never separately, and nothing outside of agreed-upon moments. At first, the experiment did exactly what Rick had hoped. Their marriage sparked with new energy. They laughed more, touched more, and Jamie even began to see the allure. It was thrilling in its own way, exciting, but still controlled. They began calling it their reset button, a secret world that added a bit of fire to their otherwise routine life. But the thing about fire is that it doesn't always stay contained. And within a few short months, the careful balance between curiosity and chaos would begin to tilt. Emotions started bleeding into what was supposed to be purely physical, and for one member of the group, it became more than a fantasy. It became the beginning of an obsession, one that no one could see coming. As the arrangement continued, the lines between fantasy and reality began to blur. At first, everyone involved seemed to understand the boundaries. The weekends were scheduled, the rules were reviewed, and there was an unspoken agreement to keep emotions out of it. But human behavior is rarely that neat. While Rick and Laura were both able to keep things casual and compartmentalized, something shifted between Ben and Jamie. It wasn't obvious at first, just subtle changes in behavior that slowly grew, more intense with each encounter. Ben began texting Jamie during the week, far more often than the occasional check-ins they had all agreed on. At first it was friendly, sending memes, commenting on a show they'd all watched together, or making casual observations about the weekend. But over time, his messages grew more personal. He started asking about her day, her work, her feelings. He brought up details Jamie barely remembered sharing, like the antique bracelet she wore because it belonged to her late grandmother, or the fact that she hated thunderstorms. He complimented her intelligence, her voice, even the way she laughed when she was nervous. These weren't just physical comments anymore. They were emotional hooks. Jamie didn't know how to respond. Part of her was flattered. Ben was attentive in a way Rick hadn't been in years. But another part of her felt a creeping discomfort, a sense that things were starting to slip out of control. She didn't tell Rick about the messages right away. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it, assuming it would pass. But it didn't. Ben began showing up at the places Jamie frequented. Once, he casually appeared at the grocery store when she was shopping alone. Another time, he claimed to be in her area and suggested they grab coffee, just the two of them. When Jamie politely declined, Ben didn't argue, but the frequency of his texts increased. It was as if he was trying to maintain a presence in her daily life, inserting himself wherever he could. Meanwhile, Rick and Laura's dynamic was completely different. Their interactions remained light, playful, and without emotional depth. Rick had no idea what was happening between his wife and Ben. Jamie began to feel isolated, unsure who to confide in. She started deleting messages before Rick could see them, not because she was hiding an affair, but because she didn't know how to explain the situation without sounding guilty. As weeks passed, the tension grew. Ben became more intense, less patient. He hinted at feelings, at wanting something more with Jamie. She tried to draw a line, but it only seemed to make things worse. What had started as an experiment in trust was slowly unraveling into something darker. Jamie felt the foundation of her marriage starting to crack, not because of what she had done, but because of something she had let in, something that was no longer just a fantasy. What Jamie didn't realize then was that Ben wasn't just infatuated, he was fixated, and fixations, once they take hold, rarely fade quietly. By the time spring arrived, Ben's behavior had moved from unsettling to undeniably obsessive. Jamie tried to be polite, careful not to provoke him, but it became harder to ignore the shift. The tone of his messages grew darker. He began asking why she wasn't responding as quickly, wondering aloud if she was hiding him. He accused her of playing with his emotions, saying she had awakened something in him that couldn't be put back to sleep. Jamie started to feel trapped, unsure how to end something she never truly started. When she finally confided in Rick, the reaction was immediate. He was furious, not just at Ben, but also at Jamie for keeping it a secret. Trust, already fragile from the arrangement, now seemed fractured. Jamie tried to explain that she hadn't encouraged Ben, that she was scared and unsure of what to do. Rick listened, but the damage was done. He insisted they end the arrangement entirely and never speak to the Callahans again. That same evening, Rick sent a blunt message to both Ben and Laura. The swapping was over, and all communication should cease. For a few days, it seemed like the right decision. No more texts. No more drop-ins. Life began to feel normal again, or at least stable. Jamie and Rick tried to repair what had been broken. They took a weekend trip to a nearby beach, went to dinner without checking their phones, and even started talking about buying a new home, a fresh start. But peace is rarely permanent when obsession is involved. A week later, Jamie found a note tucked under her windshield wiper at the grocery store. It was handwritten and unsigned, but unmistakably from Ben. "You can't pretend this didn't mean something," it read. "You don't just walk away from a connection like that." Her hands trembled as she read it. She looked around the parking lot, heart racing, but saw no one familiar. Then came the flowers, always the same kind, her favorite white lilies. No card, just delivered to her office desk by an anonymous courier. Rick, increasingly suspicious and protective, installed security cameras around their house. Jamie stopped going places alone. Every time her phone buzzed, her stomach turned. Even Rick, once dismissive of anything emotional, admitted they might need to involve the police. But when Jamie finally went to report the harassment, she hit a wall. There were no direct threats, no physical harm, and no proof the gifts were from Ben. The officer listened patiently, but explained that unless he crossed a legal line, they couldn't do much. She left the station feeling helpless. Meanwhile, Ben had gone quiet online. His social media profiles were deactivated, and his work voicemail claimed he was on extended leave. When Rick tried reaching out to Laura for answers, she was evasive, saying only that Ben was going through something and needed space. She seemed tired, emotionally drained, but unwilling to say more. Jamie couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. It wasn't just a gut instinct. It was a certainty that Ben wasn't finished. He had slipped from her life publicly, but in the shadows, he was still watching, still waiting, and he had already crossed the line from interest to obsession. After the flower deliveries and the note, Jamie's anxiety deepened into fear. Every creak in the house, every unfamiliar car parked on their street, made her uneasy. Rick tried to be strong for both of them, but even he couldn't hide his growing concern. He double-checked the locks at night, kept his phone fully charged, and began carrying his licensed handgun more regularly. The air in their home had shifted, from warmth and routine to tension and vigilance. What had once been their sanctuary now felt like a place under siege. The security cameras helped at first. Rick positioned them at the front and back entrances, plus one covering the driveway. He reviewed the footage daily, hoping to find something that could explain the strange occurrences. But for weeks, the videos showed nothing suspicious. Still, the feeling of being watched never left Jamie. She started to believe Ben was smarter than they had given him credit for, careful, calculating, and perhaps even prepared for this kind of fallout. Then, one morning, Jamie returned from work to find the front door slightly ajar. Nothing was stolen, and there were no signs of forced entry, but the throw blanket on the couch was folded differently, and one of Rick's gym bags had been moved. It was enough to confirm her worst fear. Someone had been inside. She called Rick in a panic. He raced home, checked the security footage, and found nothing. That night, Jamie barely slept, replaying the scene over and over in her mind, wondering what she had missed. The next day, they found a pair of muddy footprints just outside the sliding glass door in the backyard. Rick immediately called the police. Officers arrived, took notes, and examined the area, but with no break-in and no definitive suspect, they could do little beyond filing a report. The officers' words were careful but discouraging. "Keep the cameras running and let us know if anything escalates." Laura Callahan had also gone silent. Her boutique was still open, but she wasn't seen there often. Rick dropped by under the pretense of buying something, hoping to get a sense of what was happening. The employee at the counter told him Laura had been dealing with a lot lately and wasn't taking many shifts. He didn't press further, but the visit left him with more questions than answers. Then came the most chilling incident. One evening, While Rick was out running errands and Jamie was home alone, she heard something outside. A soft knock, not on the front door, but on the back sliding glass. When she turned on the patio light, there was no one there. But leaning against the glass was one of the white lilies, gently swaying in the breeze. That night, Rick and Jamie made a decision. They couldn't keep living like this. They reached out to a private security consultant and began staying with a friend in a gated community. Rick also began documenting everything in detail: times, dates, and even emotional responses. They were preparing for something, even if they didn't know what. What they didn't realize was that Ben had already decided how this would end, and he wasn't going to knock next time. He was going to let himself in. On the evening of July 18, 2023, the oppressive heat of the Florida summer hung thick in the air. Rick and Jamie had returned to their home earlier that week, hoping the increased security and time away had discouraged Ben. The cameras were running, the doors double locked, and Jamie was starting to believe the worst might be behind them. That belief, as it turned out, would cost them everything. Around 9:40 p.m., a neighbor across the street heard a loud crash, followed by what she thought was shouting. She stepped out onto her porch, but saw nothing, assuming it was just a television playing too loud. Minutes later, another neighbor, walking her dog, noticed movement in the Matsons' backyard. She later told investigators she saw someone hunched low, moving toward the rear of the house. Before she could react, a sharp scream cut through the night. Inside the home, chaos was unfolding. Security footage later showed a figure dressed in dark clothing entering through the back door, which had been carefully pried open. The man moved with purpose, not like someone stumbling through a robbery, but like someone who knew exactly where to go. He was carrying a small bag and wearing gloves. Rick had been in the kitchen, prepping a late dinner. Jamie was upstairs. The footage caught only a portion of what happened next, but based on evidence and the crime scene report, the struggle was brief and violent. Rick confronted the intruder, Ben, and within seconds, the fight turned deadly. Ben stabbed Rick multiple times with a combat-style knife. Blood spattered across the tile floor and cabinets. Rick, already severely wounded, managed to grab the handgun from the drawer near the pantry. Upstairs, Jamie heard the commotion and ran down just in time to see Rick collapse. In what investigators first assumed was a moment of self-defense, Jamie fired one round at Ben, striking him in the chest. He stumbled backward into the sliding glass door, which cracked under the impact, and collapsed into the backyard. By the time police arrived, called by a frantic 911 call from Jamie, the scene was a blood-soaked nightmare. Rick was pronounced dead at the scene. Ben's body lay just beyond the broken glass, still clutching the bag he'd brought, a roll of duct tape, zip ties, and a second knife. The implications were horrifying. He hadn't come to talk. He had come to carry something out, something premeditated, and potentially even worse than murder. Jamie was found upstairs, crying uncontrollably, her hands and clothes soaked in blood. She was taken into custody but not arrested. At the time, police believed she was the surviving victim of a home invasion turned deadly. News broke quickly across local media. A husband killed defending his wife from a stalker who had grown dangerously obsessed. But even in those early hours, detectives noted small inconsistencies, details that didn't quite add up. And as they began reviewing the footage and digital footprints, they would uncover a far more disturbing truth. What looked like a horrific act of self-defense might have been something else entirely.